Just minutes from downtown Toronto are some of the most valuable land in Canada. And the city where developers will squeeze a condo tower into any available piece of land they can find. Out of 600 acres of public parkland, sitting on some of the most valuable waterfront real estate in Canada still look like this. The journey to the island from the mainland takes a few minutes by ferry or by any of the private boats. The ride takes about 15 minutes and goes to all three major islands. Hanlans Point to the west, Center Island in the middle, Wards Island to the east. Starting point today is on the west end at Hanlans Point. The Toronto Islands were not always islands. Before 1858, this was a sandbar peninsula that was connected to the mainland. It was a thin strip of land that was attached to what is now Tommy Thompson Park. In 1858, a storm broke the peninsula apart and created the islands as they exist today. By the late 1800s through the early 1950s, the island had become a summer resort. Ferries would bring Toronto family out to cottage communities, there were hotels, there was a small amusement park. And at the peak in the early 1950s, there were over 600 homes, there were businesses, there were schools. It was a functioning lakefront community that was only 50 minutes from downtown. Then the politics changed. The post-war planning consensus decided that the island should be a public park for everyone, and that any house that was in the way of that vision needed to go. Through the 1950s and the 1960s, hundreds of homes were demolished and residents were evicted. The city cleared most of the island community to build the park that exists today. But not all of it. A core group of residents refused to leave and they fought the city for decades. In 1993, the Ontario legislature passed the Toronto Islands Residential Community Stewardship Act, creating the land trust that protects the remaining community to this day. Hanlans Point is the westernmost island and is usually the quietest and the least visited outside of summer. It was named after Ned Hanlan, who was Toronto's most celebrated athlete of the 19th century. He was a world champion rower that grew up on the island and whose family ran the first hotel here. Of particular note is the Hanlans Point Beach, which has been a gathering space for the queer community since the 1970s. In 1999, the beach was officially designated as clothing optional. Heading east towards Center Island and you can feel the atmosphere change. This is the part of the island where you have the crowd and all the noise. Well, typically, I was here very early in the morning, so it was still quite visibly empty. If you grew up in Toronto, you probably have memories of coming here to Centerville Amusement Park. The park was opened in 1967 and ran as a small-scale family amusement park that operated on a concession model. The city would lease the park to a private operator who would run the ride, then pay the city a concession fee and keep the operating profits. And that structure, the public land, private operation, shared revenue, is exactly the template for how the island generates income. The food concessions work the same way. The bike rentals, the paddle boat hire, every single revenue generating activity on the island runs on some version of the public land private operator model. And then there's the ferry system, which is the most direct revenue line the city controls. Ferry fares that are collected at Jack Layton Terminal go to the Toronto Port Authority and to the city. In peak summer season, the ferry actually runs continuously and you see queues stretch far back along the terminal. The ferry has become both a transportation system and an admission mechanism, and that helps to create the natural bottleneck that controls access and also generates revenue in a way that a land-connected park would not. City of Toronto spends millions of dollars annually on maintenance of the island, the ferry system, the programming, and general infrastructure. If you keep walking east past the amusement park and the concession stands, the crowds start to thin out. We're now approaching the residential part of the island. There are about 650 to 750 residents in about 262 homes here on Ward Island. It's actually the largest car-free community in North America, so aside from few municipal vehicles, you would not find any cars here. There are also no grocery stores or retail stores. The residents will usually move around by bicycle or on foot or by wagon. The houses here are quite modest by Toronto standards, but they're very well maintained. At least from the exterior, I didn't go in. This house might sell for $250,000 in a city where the average detached home costs over $1 million. Bad news, if you can call it that, is you cannot simply buy it even if you had the money. The houses here operate on a community land trust, so residents own their houses but not the land. The land is leased from the province through the Toronto Islands Residential Community Stewardship Act of 1993, and the lease runs for a fixed term and is usually renewable. But because the residents do not own the land, the houses are not subject to normal real estate market appreciation. By implication, the prices are informally capped by the structure of the system itself, since the land component that would drive most Toronto property appreciation is not available to be monetized. If you want to buy a house here on Ward Island, you have to join a purchasers list. At the moment, it's currently capped at around 500 people, I'm not even on the list yet. When a home becomes available, eligible buyers on the list are offered the opportunity to purchase by a lottery system, and only 1 or 2 homes sell per year. So as you can imagine, the wait can stretch to decades. On paper, the 1993 legislation did exactly what it was supposed to. The community here on the island still exists, the land the house sits on is still public, and no developer has built anything on the Watts Island waterfront. But the consequence of that is residents can become locked in, because selling means they have to accept a significant financial disadvantage compared to what equivalent years of mainland house ownership would have produced. In terms of demography, there is low turnover, there's an aging population, and there's almost no mechanism for new families with young children to enter, except the house is passed down to them by their parents. And that is the complexity of a seemingly good policy. Community land trusts are one of the most discussed tools in global affordable housing policy, and Watts Island is one of the oldest and most visible examples of one that actually operates in a major city. Which brings us back to the question this whole place raises. Not just about Watts Island, but about the entire islands in themselves. The system definitely solved the problem it was designed to solve, but it also created a different set of problems that the legislature may not have fully anticipated. Now, whether those trade-offs are acceptable depends on what you believe the purpose of the system is. If the goal was preventing speculation and preserving the community, it has largely succeeded. Let's step back from the housing story for a moment and zoom out to the old 600 acres and ask the original question: why is this still here? There's an opportunity cost that the city is foregoing by not allowing private development here, especially in terms of potential tax revenue and the yearly cost to maintain the islands as public parkland. From a very narrow tax revenue perspective, the land could generate more money. The question is whether maximizing revenue should be the goal, because there's a crucial need to also view tourism and quality of life as economic assets. The islands receive millions of visitors annually and contribute to Toronto's attractiveness as a place to live and work. The amount of public green space at this scale in a very dense city is a quality of life multiplier that shows up in everything. So, in retrospect, the 1993 legislation did not just protect the Watts Island community. It also created the legal structure that makes the island very difficult to develop, even if a future government wanted to. The fight the islanders won many years ago produced the protection that well extends beyond their own neighborhood. So while many waterfront cities have developed their lakefront, Toronto, for now and hopefully for a very long time, has protected a large piece of its waterfront as a public space. The result is something that comparable cities don't have: the free, accessible, publicly owned waterfront parkland at the scale of a small town that is only 15 minutes by ferry from the financial district. The islands are one piece of how Toronto's public land gets managed. Next time, we're going inside the city, looking at the neighborhoods, the economics, and the gentrification act that is reshaping everything from the East End to the West End. Still the same city, but completely different story.
May I have your attention, please? As we approach the dock, please remain seated if possible. Please ensure that you have a proper stance and hold on to a railing. Stay clear of the stairs until the boat is docked, and please do not stand on the stairs or at the top of the stairs. We thank you very much for riding with us aboard the Toronto Island Ferry.